China's GDP today, well, it's growing really quickly, but GDP per capita is still a fraction of the US level. And that points to huge amount of potential in the years ahead. Gary, we heard you talk about the way in which entrepreneurs have driven China's growth, right? From entry into WTO and the rise of the East Coast export factories to the e-commerce giants like Alibaba and Tencent. Of course, the entrepreneurs have been a significant driver of China's development. But we heard Fred say, well, perhaps the environment for entrepreneurs has changed, and it's become a lot more challenging. What's your perspective on this? Has the Xi Jinping Common Prosperity Agenda really changed the story here? And if it has, what has China got to do to revive those animal spirits?
Well, I would say the Xi Jinping Common Prosperity has no hope of being achieved without the entrepreneurs in China. I mean, the one is not going to be able to exist without the other. I think you have an allocation issue, and allocations flow over time. In China right now, when you have over 70% of the consumer savings are in property, number one, that was a mistake never allowed to happen, and it's totally unsustainable going forward. Why does that happen? Well, it's because you have capital markets and a stock market that have basically been flatlined for the last 15 years. You put $1 in 2009 in the Chinese stock market, you have $1 today. Maybe you have $1.02, maybe you have 98 cents. And part of that is simply trust. And we're going to hear a lot more about that word, because when you do reform, you have to make sure that the reform is actually establishing trust. If the Chinese consumers don't feel comfortable, those hands get jammed in the pocket so deep, no force on earth is going to get them to spend money. Because historically, as families, pick whatever scenario you want to use, Cultural Revolution, et cetera, they simply won't spend. So the government policies of trying to increase consumption will not work unless they establish trust. The asset allocation that needs to occur in China is people willing to put money in the stock market from the property market, having the capital market be another sustainable, long-term store of value. That is not seen that way today. And they've done precious little in the last 5 or 6 years to actually encourage people to do that. So entrepreneurs are fulfilling their job. I would say there aren't as many startups today, but what the problems they're trying to solve with technology, the depth of the technology innovation is very, very high. And the number of entrepreneurs is still enough. Again, 80-something%, China's 40% now with a global venture capital ecosystem. That's enough money, there's enough people, there's enough market demand. But they also need to establish a more sustainable capital market structure so that people don't think there's just one place to save money in China. And right now, that's the property market.
What would be one powerful signal that Beijing could send that they want to move in that direction?
I think Fred probably knows the capital market structure better than I do in China. I would say that these market interventions that they do, where the government starts going in and buying stock, I think it's a mistake. I think the lack of quality analysis by most of the investment banks in China compared to their foreign counterparts is a problem. Allowing that market to open up so that the best bankers in the world could actually get in and establish a presence in China and support the capital market, I think would be good. So more competition in the financial services market from global players is something that was promised as part of WTO, but it really has not yet materialized.
Fred, do you want to come in on the capital market story? What's the unfinished business for Pan Gongsheng at the PBOC?
So China today is the second largest capital market in the world after the US. Both equity capital market and the bond capital market is all, north of 20 trillion. But unlike the US, there's not enough depth, not enough liquidity, not enough transparency. And also I would say there's not enough critical mass of institutional investors, right? So most of the national savings, as Gary alluded, is really scattered, by individuals and the mattresses or speculative into property and the like. So, to really unleash long-term contractual savings, insurance is a long-term insurance policy, but also pension. I'm sure earlier people talked about the demographic. Maybe not this something people draw the parallel between China and Japan. Demographic trend so starkly similar. But China actually has the opportunity to respond to that, by leveraging the national savings rate, more long-term saving for old age and pension. And with that, then Gary's can not just rely on sophisticated US investors, pension funds. They can actually raise money easily within China from Chinese pension funds and insurance companies. Because given the sheer size and the diversity and the opportunity set in China, it's not realistic to rely on international capital and confidence alone. You need to have enough domestic capital mobilized, for long-term investments. That will be a virtuous cycle, and I think there's opportunity there.
Jenny, we've talked a lot about risk on this panel. We've talked about risks in the property sector. We've talked about risks in the financial sector. But I think for many people in the world, looking in, they see one even bigger risk, the risk of a crisis in the Taiwan Strait. You ran Taiwan policy on the National Security Council. How should we be thinking about this? How big is the risk? of a misstep triggering a crisis? And if one does occur, what's the impact on the global economy?
I think in many ways, the situation in the Strait is at its most dangerous point in at least the last 20 years, maybe even more dangerous than that. If we imagine this as three sides to a triangle, each side of the triangle is kind of moving away from the other. So you have in Taiwan increasing affiliation with a different sense of what Taiwan is and Taiwan's democratization, and an increasing sense that Beijing more recently has been less friendly and more of a foe towards Taiwan. In Beijing, you have increasing sense of concern about Taiwan's trajectory, and also an affirmation that Chinese leaders don't want to hand this issue off to the next generation, as they've said quite clearly. And then in Washington, as we've already been discussing, there's that growing tension with China and growing distrust of China, and in particular, a concern about developments in the Strait, because that could be a major point of crisis, not just between Taiwan and China, but also between the U.S. and China. If a crisis were to break out, I think it's really difficult to understate the risks for the global economy. If we take a look at just one side of that triangle, at Taiwan, and just one thing that Taiwan makes, granted, a very important thing that they make a lot of, which is semiconductors, the number of sectors that rely on Taiwan's both cutting edge and more mature nodes, it's everything from smartphones to PCs, home electronics, and autos. Already you have a huge portion of global output and a lot of services that rely on those products. If Taiwan's supply of chips were to be impacted in any way, and in particular if it were to go offline, I think the implications for the global economy would be huge.
So I think we found some reasons for cautious optimism about China's medium to long-term growth prospects on the panel today.